Let's talk supply chain. So welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you.
I am excited to have you here. I mean, Nipendo brings together some of my favorite things: partnerships, supply chain efficiencies, intelligent automation to free people up to work on the big stuff, right? You really are leading on some of the best and most valuable industry trends. So I cannot wait to find out more. And I'm so excited you decided to do this episode with us. So let's dive right in. Let's start at the beginning, because from what I've read, Nipendo really was born out of how difficult it has historically been to successfully embrace new technologies and softwares. And I think it's something we can all really relate to. So how and why was Nipendo founded? And what's your vision for the industry that your platform is helping to facilitate?
Right. Well, thank you for having me. So yeah, Nipendo started around 10 years ago or so, and the founders were really focused on two things. One of them was that folks were trying to do stuff with technology, but the adoption curve was not what you would want it to be, either on the buyer side or the supplier side.
Okay.
And the second thing was kind of a realization that most of the solutions in spend management were really buyer centric,
Mm.
and suppliers ended up having, if a supplier had 100 customers, they had 100 portals that they had to log into and 100 passwords to remember and things like that. So it was a little bit about trying to solve those two problems, adoption and really the supplier experience.
Well, and think about all of those logins just for supply chain, and then you extend that out to your personal logins. I
Yeah.
mean, now you're into the thousands, and nobody wants that. I mean, we hear people complaining about that all the time. Now, you haven't been there since the company was founded.
Right.
Tell us why you joined Nipendo. What was it about them that really got you excited to go work with them?
I mean, when you ask that question, it makes me feel old because I have kind of, I feel like I've been through the three ages of spend management. I was at Ariba at the very beginning when it was really establishing the space. I was at Evalua when they were really doing the second thing, which was the space was established and more configurability was really required by buyers in order to get exactly what they wanted done. Now, the reason I joined Nipendo is because I kind of like the unique aspect of them coming to this with, we jokingly refer to it, bring your own beer, right? Those kinds of things.
Okay.
They have a bring your own system kind of situation where,
Mhm.
and this kind of goes after that adoption problem is if you're using something crap, just use it. And what we'll do is we'll broker in between that and what the supplier is using. The supplier should bring their own system as well. So it was that approach, much more additive than disruptive approach to what customers are doing, both on the buyer and the supplier side, that really intrigued me as kind of the new age of spend management.
Well, and I can hear a collective sigh of relief when you talk about additive instead of disruptive,
Yeah,
because a
yeah,
lot of time we hear so much about disruptive technology, and I feel like some people get a little bit overwhelmed by that
for
word.
sure. Yeah, yeah. No, no. I mean, this goes back a long time for me. Is the analysts and others are looking for disruptive technologies and ways to kind of throw everything around, but the customers we're talking about are buyers and suppliers who don't want a lot of disruption of their process. They have to, especially in the direct materials area, don't you dare touch what's going on here. This is why EDI still exists. This is why Excel and email are still so popular, is because change management is not really their forte. And so you have to come in, you have to go with what has been adopted, you have to add to it and increment it and make it better. And sure, we're using sexy technology behind the scenes, but that's not how to sell it to these guys. It's about pragmatic results.
Absolutely. So that kind of gets me excited to find out a little bit more about what it is that you actually do, right? And how you do that. So give us an overview. Who are you? What do you do? How do you help your customers?
So at the high level, we're talking about really two things. One of them is connectivity, and the other one is communication. And so the analogy here is if you string up telephone lines around the world, that doesn't just solve everybody's communication problem because
True.
yes, you have connectivity, people can dial the phone, but there's no guarantee that the other guy will be on the line because it's around the world and he's not awake,
Right.
or he doesn't speak the same language, or the context is lost in that communication. So connectivity is one big thing that's kind of table stakes for what we do. If you're going to bring your own systems, we need to be able to connect to those systems. But then the communication, something coming out of a buyer system, like let's say an order, needs to be communicated to a supplier so that he receives it as a sales order with all the bells and whistles the buyer wants him to pay attention to. And
Right.
then he confirms it back with something that applies to what the buyer wants. So the communication about taking that signal and boosting it or blocking it or putting it in a context that the receiver can then understand appropriately, that's our job. And we're doing that across the spectrum of all the messages that are flying back and forth: orders, receipts, invoices, payments, supplier information updates, addresses and RFXs, and oh geez, all that stuff is just messages flying back and forth with the sender thinking he's saying one thing and the receiver receiving it wrong. So
Isn't
we're
that
we're
so
helping with
true?
we're helping with that idea.
Isn't that so true? I mean, we go through it in data, right? Somebody
Oh
thinks
yeah.
that they're keying in the right data, and then all of a sudden you've got one thing that's called five different things in your
Yep.
system, and
Yep.
then your data is useless. And it's totally the same thing with messages going back and forth. I think I'm using the language that the other person is going to understand. I mean, this is communication kind of 101, right? Even when
It
you're
is.
dealing with friends or family or anything like that,
Yep.
I feel like I'm communicating it well. The other person doesn't see it that way. And so that's why we have so many challenges. So let's take a closer look at that, right? Starting with the buyers. What are some of the key challenges being faced by buyers at the moment?
So on the buyer side, it's pretty familiar territory for your listeners, I'm sure. It's the processes involved here. There's the strategic kind of processes around supplier vetting and sourcing and contracting, and then there's the more transactional stuff around orders, receipts, invoices, and payments. And that second part is where our base is really, because it's that flow of information, and especially as it gets more complex, as the processes get more complex and mission critical, like with direct materials or complex services, the communication then is much more important. And the chances are with those complex things that they're using the ERP system rather than some middleware system to do that communication. You think about direct materials, it's coming out of an MRP system, or if you talk about complex services for an energy firm, oil and gas or construction or something, these are all things that have complex moving parts, and they've really spent a lot of money putting all that stuff inside of their own ERP systems. They have
Mm-hmm.
modules that are specific for it. So that's where the adoption is. So we need to be able to take something natively out of that and then transform it into something that the supplier can understand and respond to appropriately and with good timing, because of the
Yep.
mission critical aspect of timing. You run your MRP every night, you want to find out if the supplier can supply something within the day,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can update that as well. So it's really about a matter of taking what's coming out of the systems that people are comfortable being in on the buy side, and adapting that for suppliers. And on the
Mm-hmm.
suppliers, same sort of thing. They produce things too. They produce quotes, they produce invoices, they produce shipping notices with new information, and that's got to be molded into something that the buyer can take into on their side. So
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the challenges, because you did a really good job of talking about the challenges and then the key benefits that the buyers have working with your platform. Let's now turn our attention to the supplier side, right? What are those challenges that they're seeing? Because suppliers have their own unique set of obstacles to navigate. And then what are the benefits that they see from using a platform like yours?
right. So, I mean, it comes back to the original founder's vision here, is that the suppliers, as the buyers get their act together more, it actually forces more requirements on the suppliers, right? Because now the buyer's saying, oh, by the way, you need to log into this portal in order to respond to me appropriately for my orders that are coming to you, or
Right.
to put a good invoice in there that's going to fly through the system and I don't have to touch it. You have to follow these steps and you have to go through this stuff. And so suppliers are even though there is some synergy amongst all of that stuff in terms of the process and what they have to do, every single one of them is a different portal that they'd have to run through. So the big savings for suppliers is having one place that they can work with multiple customers through.
Absolutely.
Now they can turn that on turbo by actually connecting with us directly, so they're just working out of their home system and they're not working through one portal to all their customers. They're working through their system in an integrated way with all their customers. So that's how you kind of really make that into turbo. And we've been very good at this aspect of it. We've got about 20% of our customers are integrated and working with multiple customers
Hmm.
and are really saving a lot. Of course, it's the ones who kind of self-select into that area because they have so many transactions with those customers, right? It doesn't make sense if you've got 4 or 5 transactions a day or 20 or 30 a month or whatever to log into a portal and do those transactions. It's much better to do them directly from your system, have it integrated through Nipendo to broker that information out to the appropriate customer. So
Amazing.
that's the big savings for them.
Yeah, so you're speaking in your own language. It gets sent through Nipendo. Nipendo does this, and then it comes out the other end in the other person's language. And if we think about time zones, we think about language itself, whether we're both speaking English or there's just language barriers between the buyers and the suppliers. I
Right.
mean, this must just make a huge impact. So let's talk about that, right? What's the overall impact of facilitating buyers and suppliers to work much more successfully together? I mean, collaboration is the future of business. I say this all the time, but what's your
Yeah.
perspective on it at a business level, but also on a wider industry level?
I mean, the obvious one is that people stop doing tedious things, right? On
Right.
both sides. And really, I mean, I talked about the sexy technology. We have RPA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Robotic process automation. Instead of applying that on the edges at the buyer, at the supplier, we're playing it in the middle. So we have RPA in the cloud. So we've got little bots running around and they have one job each, right? And they do one thing really well. And we've got maybe 1,000 in our library, but really about 250 that are used a lot across multiple relationships between buyers and suppliers.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, if an invoice is coming in, it needs to have a three-way match, there's a three-way match bot and it knows how to look for the PO and the receipt to match with the invoice, and there's another one that's just looking at pricing, and there's another one that's
Right.
looking at delivery on time and so on, and they're all just like piranhas. They're jumping on every single little message that's coming across, and they may be translating things, but they may also be blocking things. They might say, you know what, we didn't get a three-way match because, hey, Mr. Supplier, you didn't ship it, and it pushes it back to them so that the supplier doesn't have to keep in mind not just the password to log in, but all the rules they have to follow to
Right.
communicate with, right?
Yep.
Different customers have different rules. That's fine. But to broker and understand all those things, that's what we got our bots for. And that's
Right.
really the big impact here. And it's kind of a testament to our founders' vision that instead of looking at deploying those rules kind of on the edges, like I said, they do it in the middle. And where we're interesting is that no matter who is sending it, we're we're making a universal format for that object, that service, so that our bots can go after it and we can keep our bots in a scalable state. So they can work on the invoices from many different suppliers for many different customers without having to be totally customized for each one of those situations. And that's kind of where the scale is going to come into that.
Well, and I think if you think about this manually, I mean, it just makes me exhausted. Just hearing you sort of list all of the different things that each customer, each buyer, or maybe each supplier comes with as far as the information that they need to really be your partner and
Yeah.
make sure that things flow smoothly. I mean, we all saw with the pandemic what can go wrong, right? Shortages, flow of material, everything that we're still dealing with right now in supply chain. And that's what makes this so important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's what we're feeling. I mean, everybody got a shot in the arm in a way
Yeah.
from the pandemic, and people having to kind of rethink their jobs and what am I doing? that's value add, and what am I doing that can be automated. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a fair amount of good introspection that people went through, and I think they're a lot more open to this kind of situation now than perhaps they were before.
Well, and let's talk about digitization, right? We hear about it all the time. And I've noticed some of the conversations that I'm having are really changing, right? At first, it was digital transformation is the savior of the whole industry. Then there was
Yeah.
cynicism because it was perceived like it wasn't working. Then there was almost a slow understanding that a lot of businesses weren't actually approaching it right. They didn't really know what they wanted, or they were purchasing the wrong technologies, even. And I noticed there's even a quote on your website from a customer who actually admitted that they were initially reluctant to deploy your software. So, what are you seeing from your perspective? What are people doing right when it comes to digitization and automation? What are they doing wrong? And what do you say to those businesses that are nervous about embracing that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's kind of funny because you touched on where digitization, or guess what? There's also digitalization, and it's just
Okay.
driving me crazy. But anyway, digitalization. I don't know what the difference is. There's somebody smarter than me that's figured that part out. All I know is that when digitization comes into play, it's about the connectivity question. It's about making sure that those written down things become bits and bytes that you can do a little bit easier, transformations and everything with.
Right.
But it's still about the message. It's still about, what does that actually mean? What did that mean to you when you said it to me? And what should I read that as when I put it into my system? Right. So it's
Right.
still the transformation there. And I think that's where this dip happened, is that people said, let's digitize everything. And then they were just digitizing messages that were not translated. And
Mm.
that's where you get the dip. And where people are coming out of it is that they're settling on terminology. They're settling on the way to speak to each other, which is hugely hard around the world with the weird suppliers and different industries that people are in. It's
Yeah.
it's very difficult, right? So you can't settle as easily. So you need somebody in between that can kind of say, no, 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 what he meant was this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we've been able to prove things for folks that are reluctant. They see the huge mountain of difficulty that is, or they see the failings of just digitizing things, and they get a little bit concerned about that. And we want to kind of work at that one step at a time through somebody who can translate, basically.
Yeah, and I appreciate you going through that and sort of talking us through what that looks like. The other part of digitization is the overwhelming nervousness around integration and onboarding. I mean,
Yeah,
when you hear those words, you're kind of like, well, do I have time? Does my IT department have time? Does my team
yeah,
have time?
yeah.
Like it sparks so many different conversations and questions that you have when you hear about a new technology, when we're talking about a new technology and we're talking about people taking a look at, Nipendo as a solution for them. And I know that Nipendo was founded because of the heavy investments in time, effort, and money that was demanded by introducing other new software solutions. So I presume that the integration with Nipendo is fairly easy, but talk us through that.
Yeah, no, it's a good case here. And I talked about the three ages that I went through, and the reason I think that Nipendo is able to be successful here in this third age is not because of what Nipendo did. It's because the industry as a whole has evolved to a point where there's some definition now at the system level on both buyer side and supplier side. There's some definition of what the objects are that we're trading back and forth. We got orders, we got receipts, invoices, RFXs, supplier records, whatever those things are. Most systems now have a relatively good and somewhat normalized context for that, and they have APIs. They know they have to work well with others.
Mm-hmm.
So those two things have made integration an easier thing. Don't get me wrong, it's still the long lead time item, mostly because not of the difficulty or complexity of integration, but because of the availability of IT folks. At the end of the
Ah,
day, they got lots on their plate, and they've got a pared down staff after the pandemic and everything. So it's about getting on their plates. But what we've done there is we've realized that in terms of core competencies, we're about the center, about that, about RPA in the cloud and all that other translation stuff, which we think is a big deal, but it's table stakes that you have connections, connectivity, and there are experts for every system out there. And luckily, those systems realize that most of the messages we're passing back and forth are not crazy customized messages. They're very standard messages. And with all that in mind, we're able to do this much easier than we used to be able to do it, with plugins to all the famous systems on both sides. Right?
Awesome. And thank you for your honesty with that, right? Because, we also want to be fair to the audience and let them know what that could look like, the people that you need in place. And I think that makes it also easier for you when you're talking to a potential client or a client that's interested in your technology, that they also have the right resources in place and they're committed to doing it too.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, kind of what we are is we like to keep it real, right? So
Yeah.
the honesty is the best policy on this, because it's always going to come to play anyway. And typically we say, look, that is the availability of your IT is kind of the long lead. It's not the long lead time item, but it's more of a blocking item. So you can get over that block. You can kind of figure out when that's going to happen. The rest of it is pretty easy. We're going to do the heavy lifting, because we're going to make sure that the message is going to flow through whatever pipe you open up. It's just a matter of opening that pipe. And
Yes.
and that's been the conversation that's usually broken the log jam a bit on
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, and I'm sure people, really resonate with that and are grateful for it. So, who do you like? Who is your ideal client? We've mentioned, I think, enterprise organizations. Do you exclusively work with enterprise businesses, or can you help other sized organizations as well?
Yeah, so you could imagine this has resonance in kind of two areas. One of them is enterprise businesses where they have some complexity in their operational transactional thing, because our base is really in the procure to pay area,
Mhm.
orders, receipts, invoices. If you've got direct materials, for example, if you've got that, or if you've got some complex services, that's our sweet spot. We can do indirect, of course, but it's really the more complex areas that really lean towards us, because they're doing so much work in their ERP system and feel like that communication is just lacking. So that's one, and any size organization will have good purchase there. The other one that we are targeting is in the mid market, the smaller companies that just don't have a procurement group clamoring for their own software yet. Right?
Mhm.
They're not big enough, or maybe they don't have category managers and professional buyers and everything. They have people who need to get stuff. They're usually in finance, and they want a little bit more spend management, but they don't have a need to have their own logins to some of the guys out there, Reba, Coupa, and Evalio, and those kinds of guys. So we think that we might have some capabilities there. We've certainly proven that out with our home market. So we're Israeli based originally, very hard buyers and suppliers, very demanding. So we feel like that's the crucible where we've really proven ourselves out, and we've been able to do that for small companies as well as the large, really complex ones.
That's really, really great to hear. And you work with some big names. So I'm excited for the case study question today, especially as you talk about some of those instances, right? Where
Mhm.
you've tested it out for small, you've tested it out for enterprise. So paint us a picture, maybe one example for small, one example for enterprise, of how you've worked with your customers. What was their challenge? Which solution were they working with? And what was the impact or ROI of implementing that solution?
Sure. On the large side, so one of the companies that we work with is called IAI, Israeli Aerospace. They're the Boeing of Israel, basically. So they're a defense contractor, as you can imagine, putting a lot of stuff in there, but also aerospace, airplanes, and so on. And so their suppliers and their customers are kind of the big ones of the world that you'd expect, Boeing and Honeywell and a bunch of others. And so they have actually, over the 5 years or so that they've been our customer, they've grown by leaps and bounds, and at the same time shrunk the amount of people that are working with all the orders. So I think they had a 1.5%, 1.5 growth, or almost 2x growth over 2 or 3 years.
Hmm.
And they were able to shrink the workforce of AP and procurement down during that time, cut it in half. So really kind of the opposite direction there. And the reason for that is, you think about big discrete manufacturers like that,
Mm-hmm.
when they are buying direct materials, they're buying huge things. You can't just ship it and, the UPS truck shows up at the door and knocks on
Right.
it and says, open up the back dock. You actually have to schedule when those big 3-story doors are going to be opening and stuff like that. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a ton of coordination that needs to happen there, in not just what we need, but the quality certificates on it, when it's going to ship, exactly when it's going to arrive, how it's going to be inspected, and all those kinds of things where there's communication and collaboration going on, and we've been able to help them with that. And we started out with just that, but then we've expanded it into how they do supplier management and a bunch of other things as well, as they've grown. So that one's a good one on the big side. On the small side, we've got a ton of relatively small customers that where the finance group was basically saying, look, I want the benefits of spend management. I want the benefits of spend under management. That is, that we're buying the right things from the right customers at the right price, and we're getting them on time, right? And so how can I do that without adding a procurement organization? And how can I do that without necessarily bending over backwards for all my suppliers, so that they can actually interact with me? And
Absolutely.
we've got a number of very small companies, none of which are big enough for me to mention, but where they've actually gone into that situation, especially, in the very simplest way. You could just put in AP automation and get to a point where most of our customers are over 95% touchless on their invoices, so
Wow.
that the suppliers are submitting invoices in all different forms, as they are wont to do, but we're validating those, pushing them back when necessary, holding on to them when necessary, and then releasing them to AP so that they can be posted
Huh.
95% of the time without AP having to lift a finger. And so
Wow.
that's our key metric there.
Yeah, that's huge, right? I mean, at the end of the day, everything that leads to saving money, right? Time,
Yep.
effort also results in the ROI and the benefit of digitizing and using a platform like this. I mean, that
Right.
is gold when one part of the equation doesn't have to touch it until they absolutely need to touch it, which is
Right.
huge because then things don't get lost in translation, right?
Exactly. That's
Which is
exactly the
exactly what
key.
we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. We keep coming back to that translation thing, right?
I know. So finally then, what does the future hold for Nipendo? What can we look out for? What do you have coming up?
Yeah, I joined less than a year ago, and we've got some more other crew for the U.S. market, and so we're really going to be focusing in on U.S. based buyers and suppliers. We already have a fair amount of traction here, and we've got some good references and so on. So on the enterprise side, it's about awareness, and it's about when people are ready to buy. So it's a matter of getting our name out there and making sure that we're at least considered in the RFP process, as folks are doing it as kind of an alternative to what you'd see from the usual suspects. So there's more on that to come. On the other end, on the more mid-market side, it's about partnerships. It's about partnering with players who already have good relationships in those areas. Sometimes they're the ERP players themselves,
Mhm.
and sometimes there are other folks who are working with finance on other aspects of the business who want to get into spend management. And I think that the 2023, you'll see our name out there as a kind of add-on to a more holistic approach that a mid-market company can do, so that they can kind of leverage technology to walk and talk like a big guy without having to be a big guy. And hopefully we can help them with that journey.
I love to hear that, and I cannot wait to hear more. And I'm sure our audience feels the exact same way. Imagine a world in which companies receive over 95% of their invoices automatically, fully validated and error free. A world in which interactions between buyers and suppliers are automatically governed for compliance, and where discrepancies are managed quickly and efficiently. A world in which all this is possible within a matter of weeks without having to replace existing systems or change working methods. Well, you can stop imagining because that world is here with Nipendo. Whether you're a supplier or a buyer, the Nipendo platform will help you to modernize, digitalize, and become more efficient. I mean, what more could you ask for? If you want to find out more, you can check them out over at Nipendo. Nipendo.com. And a massive thanks to Paul for joining me and for the team at Nipendo for making this episode happen. Thanks so much, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.